Morning, John Brodsky, Christina Musan. A special good morning to all of you solar people out there that have got the solar panels on your house. You've done a very good job. Solar industry has done a good job of getting these put up. You know, there was a big push to get solar on houses, and we've done it.
Well, and
right?
we met our needs. What was it for 2024? We exceeded our expectations of renewable energy for 20 like years early. I think this came out last year, right? 4 years early, something along those lines. Today's overcast weather, I guess, may not be so great for solar panels. What's also not great for solar panels and solar owners is the California Public Utilities Commission, which is trying to get its nubby little hands on your solar panels and your money.
Now that your panels are in and they've gotten you to do it with a certain number of incentives, they want to change that now because they say that the people with solar are not paying their fair share.
Right.
Right. So we've invited somebody on to try to help us get through this. Chris Moran with Solar Negotiators. Chris, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
So explain to us and our audience what is going on here between this relationship between customers and the utilities and how this money transfer might work out here.
Sure. And just a brief background. The current policies in California have been in place really since the mid-90s. And so the reason solar as an investment in the state currently makes sense is that the utility companies have to receive the solar power that you produce during the day when you're not using it. They have to receive it, account for it, and give you full retail credit at whatever rate they would charge you. That's been in place for many years. A few years ago, they made some small changes, which increased the minimum bills that someone pays on a monthly basis. It used to be $5 a month. Now it's closer to $10 with a few more dollars called non-bypassable charges. So typically it's around $15 a month. That's something that most people can digest and they can handle. It's a reasonable charge. What's being proposed now has really been inevitable. It's been coming for a long time. But the changes they're proposing, and there's a 200-page decision or proposed decision that they're going to vote on next month, really will fundamentally dismantle the existing program and policies and will have some serious effects on the investment and return on investment for solar. So happy to answer questions on that, but that's kind of the high level and some of the background.
Well, let's let our audience chime in if they want to, 490-5858. But before we do that, let's just see if we can nail some of this down because, you know, it's people are highly incentivized to get solar. I mean, it's a pretty good deal the way that things are now. Is it going to be, if all this comes to be, and you can help explain what they think is going to come to be, will it not be a good deal?
So right now, someone typically will get about a 5-year return on their investment. So if you invest in solar with cash and you're paying normal utility rates and not under any discounts, if you get full advantage of the 26% tax credit, you get those funds back through that subsidy, and then you look at the avoided cost of your power bill over time, it's a 4 to 6 year payback, depending on how aggressive the pricing was. What they're now looking at is essentially trying to establish a reasonable payback period of 10 years in PG&E's territory specifically, and they're really trying to incentivize paired storage. So solar systems that actually have some battery storage attached to them, because it all comes down to PG&E is claiming we have to manage all this power, all this generation is being distributed through our grid, but the customers who are producing it, in their mind, are not paying enough to support. And what the argument they're making is that is affecting low-income and non-solar ratepayers.
Well,
and I'm happy to get into some of the more specifics because they are the dollar amounts are a little scary. The whole solar industry is a little on edge right now.
Well, I want to get into that, but let's just get to this basic argument that the solar people now, the people who have solar, are not paying their fair share. I mean, is that a valid argument?
I try to be as objective as I can both as a citizen and as a business owner. I do believe that the current policies have been very, very favorable for the solar customer, and rightly so. They wanted to increase renewable energy adoption around the state, and so they've had I would almost call it a very rich program for the consumer. So there is a good argument to be made that there should be some changes to normalize some of that. Some of my colleagues in the industry may not agree with me, but I do think that's a reasonable position. However, the changes they're proposing, I think, are very extreme.
You know, a system to buy, and this is speaking, it sounds to me, and I think you said this too, is that this is for people that are purchasing their systems, not necessarily leasing their systems. Those are different agreements. Is that right?
So there are some differences in how, power purchase agreements, third-party owned systems, but the proposed decision that's come out that they're voting on will affect both owned systems and third-party owned systems like leases and PPAs in the same way. So it's really going to change how those third-party owned system, companies that sell those products, it's going to have to change how they approach that product and how it's sold.
This looks to me, Chris, and we're talking with Chris Moran, Solar Negotiators. This looks to me, from what I'm able to read, and maybe we can get into the numbers here, but a system typically costs, they're saying on average, $40,000. And as you mentioned, depending on what price you get your system for, you can typically pay it off 4 to 6 years after installation through these incentives that are in place. This would take that and double that number, they're saying, to around now 10 years.
Yep.
$40,000 is a heck of a lot of money. And,
it sure is.
And this seems to me like it's taking away the incentive. Like, we've done such a good job in this state. Now I feel like I'm going to be punished because I wanted to, get on board with solar, go green, and put a system on my home.
Sure. And there's a lot of considerations here. One, California, a third of the solar in the country is in the state of California. There's 68,000 jobs at stake. So there's a lot to consider for, California's renewable energy goals and how this policy change will really throw the brakes on adoption. And then when you look at the current payback, you're right. Most solar systems cost somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000, depending. And when you reduce that by the tax credit amount, the payback, if you're paying cash, is pretty rapid. Most people will finance their systems for no money down, and there might be a 12 or 15 or 20-year loan on it. And they're eliminating a power bill that was $300, let's say, and they're replacing it with a monthly payment of $127. That makes sense right off the bat. What these changes are proposing are minimum bills per kilowatt. And just to give the audience a little bit of kind of a calculation, per kilowatt installed, they're proposing $8 per month per kW. So if you install a 10-kilowatt system, that's $80 per month on top of the rest of your bill, which is and there's a little bit of what's called a market transition credit, which will reduce that by a very small amount, but it's not meaningful enough. So there's a lot to look at here.
490-5858. Got a couple of questions for you here, Chris, from our audience.
Sure.
Hello, Jack. You're on KMJ.
Yeah, hi. I'm just wondering, is it illegal for a couple of homeowners to actually build their own system and not have anything going back into PG&E?
So you can build a generation and storage system that is sufficient to allow you to be what I call grid independent, meaning you never push or pull power from the grid, but you really have to have usage habits that are controlled. You have to have enough storage and enough production, and on rainy or overcast days you might have problems. But there are problems with trying to say I'm just going to disconnect my meter switch and not have anything to do with PG&E. That's not something that's allowed, in a normal metropolitan area.
Right, but you could do it. Let's say if you're in a private community, let's say up in the mountains.
Yeah, in fact, I have on my home in the hills. I have a battery system and a solar system sufficient to where I can run my entire house. But I do stay connected to the grid, which means I'm subject to those charges. So it's very difficult to essentially say I'm gonna just disconnect my utility switch.
You know, Chris, in the story I have, it says that the average solar customer in the areas served by PG&E currently pays about $133 a month toward the cost of their system and for the energy they use from the grid. This decision would increase that to roughly $215, so it looks like about an $80 increase per month. Is that what you're seeing here?
Yeah, I would expect that, and that 133, that sounds like an averaged number for people who have partial offset systems, maybe still have a true-up bill at the end, and they're just taking an average of those costs. This change, if adopted, will increase a minimum bill for new customers from $15 a month. If, let's say, their solar system can cover all of their needs, it will increase it somewhere between $50 and $70 a month. And there's another consideration here that's kind of buried deep in this decision that a lot of people aren't talking about. Most people are looking at the minimum bill. What they're not looking at is the change in the compensation rate. For when you send power to the grid, they're no longer going to give you that full retail value. They're going to do a very complicated calculation based on time of day and other factors that are very boring, but it will reduce the compensation rate likely by about 75%, which is huge. So without a battery to store your excess power, you may be pushing it to the grid at a time where the rates are much lower, and that will fundamentally change the entire industry. You can make some adjustments with when you use your power to help, let's say running the pool pump during the day when the sun is up, so you're not pushing the power to the grid, you're consuming it. Those are small adjustments that can be made to help, but that is, in my mind, the biggest change that's coming. The minimum bill is a problem, but the compensation rate is a bigger problem.
Right, we're talking with Chris Moran, Solar Negotiators. Ray, thanks for calling. You're on KMJ.
Well, thank you for taking my call. My question is, I have an old system. It's probably about 18 years old, and for the last 5 years, my true-up has kept increasing, so I'm at a point where, maybe I need to add on or maybe just get a complete new system. With the new changes, is it going to be better to buy, lease, or a PPA?
Sure, and I'll try and address all of your questions. With the age of your system, I would probably recommend a full upgrade. The technology today is going to probably get you about twice as much power for the same square footage you're already using. It's always better to own your system if you're able to take full advantage of the tax credit subsidy. Some customers are not able to do that, and that's when a lease or a PPA may make more sense. I'm going to be encouraging anyone who's expecting to go solar, do an add-on to their existing solar, or fully replace their system to do it before May of next year, which is only a few months, because that will allow someone to lock in under the current rates, which are much more favorable.
All righty. Tony, you're on KMJ. Hello, Tony.
Okay. No, Tony.
Okay, well, I'll just chime in here, Chris. Let me just ask you the basic question. With these changes, is it still going to make sense to get solar, and is it going to shrink your industry, do you think, even if that's true?
Well, here it will be worth it when compared to the rising cost of power. So that's something to consider. And again, as long as that solar tax credit is in effect, a large percentage of the investment comes back to you. That is going to be going down unless it gets extended. So that's something to consider. I expect the industry to explode in the next 4 months because everyone is going to be rushing to get in under what they call NEM 2, which is the current policies. So I expect probably the highest growth of solar ever in our history over the course of the next 5 months for that reason. And then I would expect the industry to contract by at least 30% thereafter. And so there's going to be major changes. And this is just to put some context into this, this is the highest solar tax or penalty, if you will, that will be imposed by any state in the U.S. Nevada made some major changes to their NEM policy several years ago, and it killed their solar industry overnight. They realized it was a mistake, and they reinstated their NEM, and now their solar industry is making a recovery. So I feel like this is a real big swing to another extreme, and there's going to be some consequences in relation to the goals that the state has for renewable energy adoption.
Chris, let's talk about solar packs really quickly before we say goodbye, or battery packs before we say goodbye, because you kind of have mentioned it, but what does this do to battery packs? Is this trying to incentivize people to purchase battery packs to store some of their solar so they don't have to sell it off?
It is. The biggest argument that the utility companies are making is that there's major swings during the day. When the sun is high in the afternoon, most people are actually running on solar power because the extra power from their neighbors that are producing solar is going to the nearest place it can be consumed. So, but at the end of the day, as the sun sets, it's called the duck curve. The utility companies have to ramp up these power plants to meet that demand as the sun sets. What they're trying to do is say, we want to increase customer adoption of storage capacity on the customer's side of the meter, which will actually relieve pressure on distributing energy around the grid. So it's not just for the purposes of, hey, I want backup power if the power goes down, which is what most people actually think of or want when they think batteries. This is to help manage the distribution of electricity around the grid with privatized investment, and they're using policy to drive it.
Hey, let me ask you this, Chris. Do you find that most of your customers or maybe future customers are aware that this is going on? Because this is something that's going to be considered by the Public Utilities Commission next month. Is there
Correct.
anything people can do? Do the people's voice matter here?
Yes, absolutely. There are several websites, and unfortunately I don't have them in front of me, but you can go on and submit a message to the governor saying, we believe this is the wrong direction for the state, please step in. One thing I'm sure many of listeners may be thinking who already have solar, is this going to affect me if I've already gone solar? What they're proposing is what was going to be a 20-year grandfather period. They're proposing to reduce that down to 15 years from your interconnection date. So if you went solar in 2015, you would not be subject to these changes until 2030. So there is some time and some relief on that side for people who have already made the investment. But the news of this is spreading very quickly, even to people who aren't in the industry. And a lot of people are saying, boy, it's time to get those solar panels on my roof. I've waited long enough.
All right, Chris Moran, thanks so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.